Welcome to the Bucket Plan on Demand, a podcast for financial advisors based on the best-selling book and process that simplifies financial planning. Hear from skilled industry professionals and special guests each episode that will help perfect your approach with clients and your results.
Hello and welcome everybody to this week's Coffee Break with C2P. Our topic today is actually something I've personally been looking forward to for a while since we arranged this: protecting your data in a digital world. We all know technology is continuing to evolve faster than we can keep up sometimes, especially around the use of AI. So it's making it even more important that we find ways to protect our data, protect our clients' data. And that's why we've brought on our guest today to talk about this important topic. And so our guest barista today, Carrie Kursky. Carrie is the president of Kursky Group, LLC, a private investigation agency providing identity fraud and cyber threat risk management services to executives and private clients. Carrie is also the author of both Your Public Identity, Because Nothing is Private Anymore, and Protect Your Identity. I know Elaine's going to put the link in the chat to that, and it looks like Carrie got those books behind you too, so everyone can see those. So thank you for joining us today, Carrie.
Well, yes, thank you for having me. And yes, my subliminal advertising over there.
That's all right. We like that. And for everyone tuning in today, for our audience, please do not hesitate to drop your questions in the chat. I'm sure there's a lot coming through. We will get to as many as we can as we get through today's agenda. So, Carrie, we'll kick things off. I'm always fascinated. How did we get to where we are? So you have over 20 years experience when it comes to helping victims of identity theft and fraud. Can you briefly share how you got into this field and where you got started?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting path, not one that I had intended. I always say it found me. So it started out, my company, we're a licensed private investigation agency, been in Naples, Florida since 2001. And about 2004, 2005, in that area, we started getting some calls from victims of identity theft. And back then, there weren't really any resources. I mean, the Federal Trade Commission, their website was pretty basic. There weren't really anything out there to help people. As a matter of fact, some of the laws in place today were not even existent back then, or at least didn't have the extra protections. So we got calls from victims wanting assistance, and we told them, look, we've never done this before, but we're, an investigation's an investigation. We're happy to, help you navigate through this. And they're like, yeah, absolutely. And so we worked with the first few, and then of course, word of mouth spread. And then we started noticing patterns and habits of how people were becoming victims. Unfortunately, sometimes it was due to their own actions. And so I started offering talks in my community to warn people about, what to watch out for. And I'll never forget, one of the first groups I reached out to is a local nonprofit. And I told them, I said, look, I'm not selling anything at all. I don't even have to say my company name. I just want to warn people. And the woman said to me, we don't care about that because that doesn't happen in Naples. Yeah, considering Naples has been in like the top 10 spots for identity theft and fraud year after year after year. And so, you just like the criminals follow the money. Right. That's really how it got started. And like I said, it just kind of took on a life of its own. So that first response told me I was onto something. And then that went into, from all the talks and everybody saying it's too much information, put it into a book. And then that led to more speaking and training. And so it just kind of evolved from there.
Wow. No, thank you for sharing that with all of us. So what are some of the most common types of digital fraud that you're seeing in this industry, in the financial sector?
Yeah, so the biggest ones that we're seeing, it's still the tried and true scams that have just been modified for the digital age. You'll get the emails, the phishing emails, you'll get the text messages, which they refer to as smishing, and then you get the phone calls, which they refer to as vishing. Now, who comes up with these names? I don't know. I think they're ridiculous. Let's just keep it simple. But basically, it's all to get you to do something. And they typically will use intimidation, but not threatening intimidation, more of a sense of urgency. And the biggest things that we see is you'll get an email that'll look like it's from your bank or from your credit card or something like that, saying, we suspected suspicious activity. If you didn't do this, click here or call this number. The big ones that we're seeing that's getting a lot of people. I mean, we worked with people that have lost millions of dollars. I mean, lost, like they are not recovering these funds. And it usually starts out by either a phone call or they'll get an email, looks like it's from PayPal or look like it's for an invoice. And it says, if you changed your mind or if you didn't do this or make this purchase, you have 12 hours to contact us at this phone number. People panic because usually it's for buying cryptocurrency or paying for a Norton renewal or that kind of stuff. And people
Right.
call these phone numbers. The other thing that we're seeing the criminals are doing is they are buying old phone numbers from companies. So if you have, a bank that decides to get rid of some of their old phone numbers and consolidate and move departments around and they're like, oh, we don't need this phone number anymore, we get rid of it. The criminals watch these things and they will buy them so that if somebody has that phone number recorded in their phone and they call it, not realizing that company doesn't have that phone number anymore, it goes right to the criminal. Other things, when people are searching online, we see this happen all the time. When people get something and because we always say validate or eliminate, validate the information to be true. If not, get rid of it. So to validate, they'll turn to the internet, do an internet search for, let's say, for example, Bank of America's phone number. Well, the first phone number that pops up might not be Bank of America because criminals can pay for ads to get these bogus phone numbers at the top of search results. And they used to be able to manipulate search engine optimization. And now with AI, they're learning how to manipulate the AI results so that those bad numbers pop up and show up there. So people think they're calling their bank or their financial institution when they're actually calling the criminals. So these are just some of the things that we're seeing. And also, the ones for business email compromise where you get an email, looks like it's from somebody that it'll be something about, wire transfer instructions, or it could be, oh, you need to reset your company password and you go to click on it and it goes to a fake login page for like Microsoft Outlook. And all you're doing is now giving your credentials to the criminals. So these are just a small little snippet of some of the things that we're seeing out there.
Yeah, and that last one you mentioned too, I know kind of transcends industries with the emails or the text messages that are from a coworker. I know we've even seen that here at C2P, but that you got to keep an eye out for those and make sure they're legit because you see the name on the email address. And I know we had a C2P event a couple months ago at our retreat where several of us were talking about that the first couple times it happens, it looks legit. Then to start keeping an eye out for it. But those are the ones that whether it's a work email or personal email, making sure that you're keeping an eye and making sure that that's a legit request. Because I think more often than not these days, it's not.
That's why we just keep it simple, validate or eliminate. Because people used to hover and it would reveal who the actual sender was, but we're finding that doesn't always work anymore. And sometimes what they'll do is they will register a URL very similar to the company URL. It might be off by 1 or 2 characters. But when we're reading it, our eyes are just scanning it, our brain's trying to fill in the pieces. So we don't catch it unless we're looking at every single character. And that's where a lot of the mistakes are made. The other big one we're seeing is still the use of the remote access software. Criminals will trick people into installing it. They could say they're from IT support, or it could be, oh, did you do this Amazon purchase? If not, well, we see it's from your IP address. Let's loop in our tech department and help figure out, where this came from. And they have the victim install remote access software. It's a legitimate software program used by IT professionals to remotely troubleshoot computer issues. Well, the problem is that the victims aren't aware of this and they go ahead and install it and they think an IT person is checking their device. Well, they're checking their device all right, but they're also getting into everything. And then after the scam call is finished, the victim says, oh, well, they never asked for money. They never asked for credit cards. Everything must be okay. But what they don't realize, that remote access software is still running. So when they go to bed at night, the criminal just moves the criminal's mouse, which fires up the device, and they go right to the web browser. And if people store their passwords in their web browser, which is the absolute worst place you could ever store your passwords, never store them in your web browser. Because if you do, the criminals are going to look at your bookmarks in your history, which usually has your financial accounts because people check those frequently. and they go to the login page and your browser automatically fills in the username and password. Now they're in your account and you have an account takeover. So that's a huge one. And again, we've seen people who have lost millions of dollars, and it's very difficult to dispute because the bank says, well, it's your IP address where you always log in from. So these are ones we've seen these probably about 3 years now, and it's getting worse.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you sharing because it's something that none of us want to worry about, but you have to, because it just like you said in Naples, or it could happen to anyone. You can't say it's not going to happen here. Carrie had mentioned in our opening, we were chatting beforehand, she has a tip sheet available on her website. So Elaine put that link in there so anyone can go on and download that. And some of this advice that, obviously we can't cover everything today, but that Carrie was willing to share is on that tip sheet. So Carrie, come back to, you mentioned AI earlier. We know, and this is kind of a hot button in this industry, in all industries right now. But is AI can improve efficiencies, bring joy to our jobs of what we're using there, and how we're using that for new opportunities in the digital world. But what are some of the ways that AI is being used for scams these days?
Yeah, so I had a conversation with someone the other day, and they made a really good point. They're like, "Yeah, my dad always told me this. Technology itself is not bad. It's the way we use it.
Hmm.
That's what causes all the problems. It could be used for good intentions, or it can be used with malicious intent, or it could just be used against us. And that's the problem with AI. And like you said, there are a lot of benefits to it. It does help improve processes and kind of streamlines things. It allows you to evaluate mass amounts of data in a short amount of time. But we use all that for good. The bad guys are using it for evil, if you will. The biggest thing we're seeing is the phishing, the smishing, the vishing. AI is being used for all of that. It is so hard today to determine what's real and what's fake because in the past, it used to be, it would say, dear customer in an email, or they were using really poor grammar. I mean, it was obvious. You could tell that these things were fake. Today, they are so well written. It's amazing. I gave a talk last year to a group of investigators,
Hmm.
and we were talking about the seeing in the future and with AI. So I went to Chat GTP and we did a live demonstration during my talk. I went to Chat GTP and I said, write me an example of a phishing email. And within seconds, it had this beautifully written one that looked like it was from a bank saying that there was a problem with your account, or you need to contact us. But the funny thing is right at it was either at the top or the bottom, and it said, this is for demonstration purposes only. So yeah, like a criminal's going to pay attention to that, But it just showed how easy it was to write these things. And it literally took seconds. And it popped up, and it was a beautiful one. We're also seeing the deep fakes where they're manipulating video. There was a large financial institution, I think it was over in Europe, where one of the employees did a wire transfer of millions of dollars out of the bank. And when she was asked why, what made you do this? She said, well, I had a Zoom call with the CEO and two other people. The two other people were completely fake. They didn't even exist. And the CEO was a deep fake. They were able to manipulate the face and the voice. We see the grandparent scam, the evolution of that now. When they get the call where it's a family member in trouble, we call it grandparent scam because that's usually who they target. But now it'll be the voice of the person, their family member. So these are things that we're starting to see how AI is being used. So, you can't take anything at face value anymore because it used to be, if you hop on a Zoom call, you can at least see them and you know that it's real. Not anymore.
Yeah, we saw, for anyone that was at our retreat back in December, Dave Allison showed an example of that, of a video that was produced that sounded like Dave. Dave tells us it wasn't him, and we've kind of had some fun doing some stuff like that. C2P with Jason, that once you get that recording, there's a softwares out there that, I mean, it looks live. And we even had some discussions around the office, I think it was earlier this week at C2P, of just how quickly things can change, especially in this industry. That the COVID, when all that happened, it proved that a lot of what we do day to day can be done virtually. And now with some of these things that are happening with AI and video, it's proving we got to get back in person. That's that's the way to know that it's not fake. And so it's shifting things again. And yeah, I'm glad you mentioned some of these tips for that. One quick question for you, Carrie. Going back to what we talked about earlier, we got a question in the chat. What password application would you recommend? Is there any one that's better than another, or there's several out there?
There are many of them out there. The one that I would kind of avoid right now is LastPass, only because they did have two major data breaches in the past couple of years. Now, I'm sure their security has improved significantly because of all of the negative press that they had. But the two things that I recommend looking for is encryption at rest and encryption in transit. So encryption at rest means when your passwords are stored on their server, if their server gets compromised, gets hacked, your data is not going to be exposed because it's encrypted. And the criminal would have to have the decryption key to be able to turn that back into usable data. Okay. I believe the problem with LastPass is they stored the decryption keys on the same servers. So it was really easy for the criminals to get a hold of it and decrypt everything. But, that would be something to look at. And then encryption in transit, because the big risk is that when you're retrieving or connecting to your password vault, that
Right.
back and forth in cyberspace, it's wide open. Anybody can intercept it. So at least if it's encrypted, what encryption does is that it scrambles the data. So if anyone does intercept it, it's useless. It's just gobbledygook. They can't do anything with it because they have to have that decryption key to put it back in the proper order so it's actually usable information. But I see in there somebody asked about 1Password. That's the one I use. I like that one. I've tried a bunch of them. I tried Dashlane and a bunch of the other ones. For me, I found Dashlane kind of clunky, where for me, 1Password was a little bit user, but other people prefer the other one. So what I recommend if you want to switch to one, don't go all in and put all your passwords in. Start with 1, 2, or 3 accounts that you use on a daily basis. That way you can test it out, get a feel for it, give it 30 days. Because when I first used it, I hated it. I was calling it every name in the book. I'm like, I don't want to do this. It's annoying. Now it's a part of my process and I don't even think about it. It's just part of what I do every day. So start small with, 1, 2, or 3 accounts. After 30 days, if you like that one, then move everything into it. Because if after a couple of days or after the 30 days, you're like, no, I don't really like this one, and you want to move to a different one, you don't want to have to move all your passwords again. So start small, but I do think they're good. A big reason why they're good is we get contacted all the time from people where the person who manages the family finances, usually it's one person in a household, they either got sick or they're on medication or they have dementia or they're in an accident or they passed away. And people are like, we can't get into the accounts. Can you get into these for us? No, we can't. So by using the password managers, you can appoint to someone, and I always forget the term that they use for it, but it's almost like a digital executor, if you will. But you can appoint someone or allow them to have access, or you can even share your vaults where if you need to share passwords. Like for me, the family, the Netflix. I was sick and tired of having to give the Netflix password out. So it's like, here's the vault for that. Go get it yourself. So I do think they're a good idea, but I have nothing against paper and pencil. If people want to use that, that's perfectly fine. If they're comfortable with it, just make sure to hide it. Don't leave it out on, and don't put it underneath your mouse pad or your keyboard. That's the first place I look.
Got it. No, thank you for the tip there of trying, 2, 3 at a time too, to see, what you like. It's a good idea. Two others that popped up. I don't know if you had feedback on either Aura and RoboForm. I don't know if you had any feedback on either of those.
Yeah, so Aura is like a new version of a LifeLock, if you will, where they all claim to offer identity theft protection. My response to that is most of the people who come to us that are victims, they have those services, but they end up hiring us to do what those services said they were going to do, but they really don't. And I can say that with confidence because that's what they tell us. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of those. And with those services, if you put a credit freeze in place, you don't need credit monitoring because if it's frozen, there can't be any criminals can still apply for credit applications using your identity, but the accounts will never be open with a credit freeze. So it's your best defense against new account fraud. And these services primarily only monitor credit-related transactions. They can't monitor for unemployment identity theft, criminal identity theft, all the other types of identity theft out there. So people buy these things and they think, oh, I don't have to worry about it. I'm protected. That's not the case. So, take that for what you will. And they also have the passwords and they also have VPN. Now, everybody has different opinions on VPN. To me, I think for everyday user at their house, it's overkill. It's ridiculous. You don't need it. All it's going to do is slow down, what you're doing. And people think, oh, well, it protects everything you're doing online. No, it doesn't. All it does is hide your IP address because instead of going off of your local server, you're going off someone else's. And now we're finding a lot of these free VPN services, they're scammers. They're creating it so you're doing everything on their servers. So I'm not a big fan of the VPNs. If you travel a lot for business and you need it because, location wise, or if you're going to be, hotels, coffee shops, airports, VPNs are kind of good because it does help a little bit, but it's not the end all be all like people make it out to be. So just, if you're at home using a VPN and you have your own Wi-Fi network, it's overkill, I think. That's my opinion. But yeah, there are a lot of programs out there that you can use for password managers. I do want to say real quick, though, a lot of times people will use Keychain through Apple, which I think is a great program. And that's not storing it in the web browser because it's in a separate program. But the only problem I have with it is last year we saw a huge increase in people taking over Apple ID accounts because most people had a bad password. They created them 10 years ago and they forgot all about them. If your Apple ID account gets compromised, there's no back door. Apple can't reset it for you. You have lost it and everything in it, which includes your passwords and keychain. So I don't like to keep all my eggs in one basket. I like to kind of have things separate. It's more work for me, but then it's more work for criminals to get into everything. So that's just kind of my take on that.
Thank you for a lot of this advice. And, one question we had there was actually similar to one we discussed earlier. So I'll kind of jump ahead. Some of the common tools to fight against fraud are encryption and the multi-factor authentication. Can you explain how these tools can help?
Yeah, so encryption, kind of like I mentioned earlier, what it does, it scrambles the data. So if somebody were to get into it, it would just be nonsense. It would just be random characters and it wouldn't be useful information. You have to have the decryption key, which could be a password as a decryption key, to put it back in proper order so it's usable information. So that's why encryption is good. As far as with multi-factor authentication, absolutely. Every account you have online, turn it on. Think of it this way. If it takes you one step to log into your account, that's one step the criminal is going to have to overcome. If it takes you two steps, that's two steps they're going to overcome. So the more barriers or hurdles that you have to do to get into your account, that's how many they have to overcome. So instead of being like, oh, I hate this thing, it's annoying, it takes more time. Well, there's a reason for that because you can't prevent criminals from trying to come after you. But if you're a difficult target, they're going to move on to somebody else. They work off of volume and numbers, just like any other business. And they're not going to devote all their time to one person who has all these hurdles in place. They're going to go off to somebody who's wide open. So make yourself a difficult target. Use these tools. With the multi-factor authentication, is basically something you know, something you have, something you are, and then so on. So that's why you have username and password. That's something you know. When they send you a code, either by a text or an email, that's because you have access to that email or that phone. And now they're progressing over to pass keys, and you have to have an authenticator app to be able to do that. If you're not familiar with passkeys, start learning about them because pretty soon all online accounts are only going to use that as an option, and you don't want to learn it when you have to have it. You want to make sure you're familiar with it before you have to start using it, because if you lose access to that authenticator, you could be locked out of some of your accounts. So start learning about that now.
Thank you. And, some of these may already be included in here, but I think kind of a question everybody has is, can you share some best practices on how our advisors can help reduce the risk of fraud for their clients? Is there anything that we should be advising our clients to do outside of just what we can do in the advisor community?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One I mentioned earlier, a credit freeze. I think everyone should have a credit freeze. There's no reason not to. The old marketing, if you will, of, oh, it's going to add so much time, it's going to interfere with the credit process, and it makes it difficult. That's just creative marketing by the credit bureaus because they don't want you to have it. They make money by selling reports. If you have a freeze, they can't sell the report. So common sense right there. So that's why they make it sound like it's this big, difficult thing to have. Go ahead and do it. It's free. We have clients where we manage their accounts for them. And they will call me from the car dealership. They're like, hey, my lease is up and they won't give me the car because they can't check my credit. I'm like, hang on, 10 minutes. We log into all the bureau accounts. We do a temporary lift. I'm like, okay, go ahead, try it now. they leave with their car. It's not a big issue. Freeze your credit. That's the best defense against new account fraud. So now that's one type of identity theft that you've blocked. Another thing that you can do, I saw one of the questions in chat was about protecting against a fraudulent tax returns. We don't see as much of it anymore, especially not for taxpayers. Where we do see it is on dependents, college-age students. That's the biggest one we see for fraudulent tax returns because the criminals have it worked out to a science where they know what deductions and what to put on there to get the maximum amount of refund. And people find out when they go to file their return claiming they're a college student, and it says, oh, one of your dependents already filed a return. So that's where we're seeing the big thing. And also it's because the IRS offers an IP PIN, which is an identity protection PIN through the IRS. That's only available for taxpayers. Dependents don't pay taxes. They can't get an IP PIN. College-age students, unless they're working, they don't pay taxes, they can't get an IP PIN. So that's why we're seeing a big uptick in them. But for everybody else, yeah, go ahead. Go to the IRS's website, and in the search box on the IRS website, irs.gov, type in Get IP PIN, and it'll take you right to the section. It'll walk you through how to do it. That PIN number you will give to your accountant or you put on your tax return. And if somebody else files a return without that number on it, it's automatically rejected. And you are assigned a new PIN every tax year. So yeah, it's one of the easiest things you could do.
I just want to share because a ton of our offices do taxes. We are the CPA.
Okay.
We had a client last tax season that had a PIN and still got their tax return fraudulently filed. And I think it's super important to communicate to clients how they communicate the PIN with you.
Yes.
Because if they're sending you the PIN via email, then it's just out there again. So like we ask for it to be securely uploaded to us through our TaxStone portal, but that's not even foolproof. We had a client with a PIN that got their return basically stolen last year, and it's been a disaster. So
yeah, and I'm glad you pointed that out because we do see that a lot, and I'm glad that your company has a secure portal. A lot of the smaller CPA and accounting firms, they don't. And even one that I was working with, years ago, they're like, oh, just email over. And I'm like, okay, I'm done working with you. I'm like, nope, this isn't going to happen. So yes, I'm glad you pointed that out. Yeah, don't ever send anything secure in an email because it is wide open. It is not secure at all. But yeah, mistakes can happen. It did significantly decrease the amount of it, but it has not eliminated it altogether. So yeah. But I'm glad you pointed that out. Like I was mentioning with the post office, mail fraud right now is at an all-time high last year, which is also involving check fraud. Instead of them stealing the checks and washing them, they're taking a photograph of the routing and account number, and they're just going to office supply place and they're buying print-on-demand checks and making checks. And what they will do is they will make them for the same check number and amount as the checks they took the picture of, but they'll clear theirs faster. So what happens is when the victim's they're reconciling their accounts, they're only looking at the check number and the amount. They're not looking at the payee. And so we had one gentleman, he wrote a $250,000 check to the IRS and saw that it cleared his bank. Well, months later, his accountant calls and goes, hey, did you ever send that check in? Because, we don't show it being received. And he's like, well, yeah, I cleared it. And they said, well, get a copy of the canceled check or cleared check from your bank. And that's when they noticed that it was not even his check. His checks always had a monogram for years. This one did not. And it was made out to somebody else. And the handwriting was so far from his that, a 3-year-old would have been able to tell you they don't match. But it still cleared the bank. It still cleared the bank. So people should set up an online account with the post office and sign up for informed delivery. It's a free service. Every day you get an email with a snapshot of the first-class mail arriving in your mailbox that day. So it's a great way to look for mail theft, especially during tax season. And if anyone tries to do a change of an address or mail forwarding, you'll get an email from the post office. Otherwise, you would get the written notification, and that could be 1 or 2 months after the fact. So go ahead and sign up for that. That's another one that we recommend for people. Finally, on financial accounts or pretty much any online accounts, sign up for the free alerts and notifications, especially if there's a wire transfer, ACH, or Zelle. Turn those on. If those hit your account, you have 24 to 48 hours to dispute them. Otherwise, the money's gone for good. So Tell your clients, turn on these alerts, make sure they're setting up their online accounts. I know some people say, I don't want the online account. I'll be vulnerable to hacking. Well, if you don't have the online account, the criminal is going to set it up for you. They're just going to pretend to be you and set up that account. Now they have the keys to the kingdom. So go ahead and set it up and turn on those alerts and notifications. That way they're there to help you monitor so that you can detect it faster and you can respond to it faster and get your money back faster.
Great. Carrie, can't thank you enough for this valuable information. This was a jam-packed half hour, of I guess warning signs for everybody, but action items and things they can be looking into. So thank you again for being our guest this week. If you're looking for more information from Carrie, please check out that link, go to her website, check out her books, check out that tip sheet. We've also, you can check out the J.L. Smith Holistic Wealth and Health podcast. Carrie's been a guest on there, and I think we've got another one coming out in a couple weeks here. So lots of more information from Carrie on there. And then next week, be sure to tune in. Our topic next week, multi-generational succession planning at your firm. Don't want to miss that. So we'll see you back here next Thursday. Until then, have a great day. And thank you again, Carrie.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Bucket Plan on Demand, brought to you by C2P, an organization whose purpose is to educate, train, grow, and support holistic financial advisors so families can achieve true prosperity. Subscribe today for the latest episodes and insights. Visit c2penterprises.com to learn how we can help support and enhance your advisory business. At the time of delivery and any subsequent publishing, information was deemed reliable, but is subject to change by the time of listening or viewing. The contents of this piece include options and projections of C2P, are subject to change, and are for informational purposes only. The information provided in this presentation is not intended to be individual investment, tax, or legal advice.